Equity in the MENA region is evolving rapidly. And in this session, our experts will discuss the challenges and opportunities involved in navigating these new horizons. Prepare for a deep dive into the world of private equity. Please join me in welcoming back Lara Habib and her esteemed panelists.
It's a free seating. So welcome back to our third panel. In our next session, we'll take a closer look at the private equity landscape in the MENA region. While the global private equity sector grapples with challenges of decade-low year for divesting portfolio companies, largely due to increased interest rates and geopolitical tensions, the Middle East paints a strikingly different picture. In 2023, the region has witnessed a remarkable surge in private equity deal-making, totaling around $14 billion across 100 deals. To put this into perspective, 2021 recorded the highest ever total, exceeding $19 billion in 160 deals, while 2022 saw $15 billion spread across 146 deals. Interestingly, even as deal activity remains strong, fundraising efforts have nearly come to a halt. Only 3 funds have successfully closed this year. Additionally, exit activity has slowed, with only 28 exits worth $5.3 billion in 2023. That's down from 42 exits valued at $17.6 billion in 2022. So we'll be exploring the outlook for the private equity sector in the region, the transition from being a capital source to an investment hub, and the role played by the PIF in nurturing the sector's development. All of this and more will be discussed with our esteemed panelists. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mit'ab Al-Shitri, Head of Private and Regional Investments at the PIF, Mr. Jad Al-Loun, Managing Partner and Regional Head of Middle East at Brookfield Asset Management, Mr. Blair Thomas, CEO of EIG Partners, and Mr. Yasser Mustafa, CEO of NBK Capital Partners. Thank you all for being with us. Mr. Mit'ab, I will start this conversation with you. So tell us more about the level of interest among businesses in the MENA region to partner with private equity funds.
Thank you, Lara, and good afternoon to everyone. Maybe before we start talking about the businesses in the region and how they're dealing with the private equity funds, maybe it's better to start by explaining how the private equity funds are now excited about the region. You said it in your opening remarks. The region has always been known to be a fundraising region, not necessarily an investing part of the world. If I take you back to 2018 when I first joined the Public Investment Fund, big part of my job was to try and convince international private equity funds to come and invest in the region. And to be very honest with you and with everyone, it was a very hard battle with a lot of hesitation toward making that decision. Today, we're on the receiving calls of these talks, and a lot of these fund managers are calling us, asking us about our mandate, asking us about the private market in general. And we're very excited about this great transformation. Obviously, the main reason for that is because the Kingdom has a very strong vision, Vision 2030, that clearly states its goals about economic prosperity, economic transformation, and we're acting on it. We've just announced our first investment with BlackRock, where we bought a part of Aramco pipeline, and we are warehousing that investment in a fund and hopefully the fund will be launched very soon so investors can have real and quick return on their commitments. Now, in terms of businesses, again, back in the day, a lot of these businesses are owned by families or were owned by families. Families don't like to sell. And if they sell, they don't want to give control. Private equity is all about selling and buying good businesses and taking some control to do their initiatives and value creation plans. I think what's happening now, there's a big shift toward that mentality. And a lot of businesses are recognizing the importance of having private equity investors coming into their boards and being part of the discussion and preparing them to the next phase of growth.
It's interesting what you said, that a lot of this interest is caused by the vision, by the Saudi vision. But if we want to talk about the region as a whole, the region, one of the characteristics of the region, it has a young population, and it has it's a bright spot, let's say, when it comes to economic growth compared to what we're seeing in other parts of the world. Saudi Arabia was the fastest growing economy last year among G20. So do you think that these contribute actually to attracting the foreign private equity managers to the region?
Absolutely. I think the Middle East has always been an interesting part of the world, and a lot of asset managers have always considered the MENA region as an important part of their investment plan. I think more focus was given to the public market, not necessarily to the alternative side of it, and mainly private equity. We have one of the, as you said, fastest growing regions, great growth on GDP. The demographics of the region are creating a very strong youth population and ultimately a very strong middle class. These kind of demographics set the basics for creating great businesses. And to show you that we're very confident about the region, His Royal Highness announced last year the creation of 6 regional companies owned directly by the Public Investment Fund. And these 6 are the Saudi Sudani Investment Company, the Saudi Egyptian Investment Company, the Saudi Jordanian Investment Company, and the Saudi Omani Investment Company, and finally the Saudi Bahraini Investment Company. And I'm proud to say that...
There's the Iraq, did you mention?
Oh, sorry, the Iraq investment, yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm proud to say that we've invested a large amount of the commitment, which is around $24 billion to the region over the next 10 years, in Egypt, in Jordan. Yesterday, one of our portfolio companies, OQGN, was listed as the biggest, as one of the biggest listing in, if not the biggest listing in Oman capital market. So we're very bullish about the region, and we honestly believe that the next phase of transformation and wealth is yet to come.
So we expect more. Regional expansion.
We're focusing now on the 6 companies, but I'm sure because the numbers are great and our returns and the impact that we're making in these countries are true evidence of our strategy. Obviously, each country has its own investment strategy. Our investments in Oman will be completely different than our investments in Egypt. But I think there might be a second wave, and if that's the case, we're very excited about adding new countries.
From this point, I want to hear your thoughts, Mr. Yasser. Each country in the region has a different level of political and economic stability. So my question to you as a global investor, how...
affects with what's happening in Saudi, but not as much. Separate economies, separate dynamics, separate currencies, and different characteristics of the companies you invest in each of these countries. We've been invested in Egypt, we've been invested in Jordan, we've been obviously invested in Saudi, UAE. If you're looking at some of the countries like that have a currency, that floating rate currency, for example, then you're looking at Egypt and you're focusing on export businesses. You want hard currency, and you can make great money in that business. If you're looking at some of the domestic growth in Saudi, you're looking at domestic growth champions. If you're looking at the UAE, you're looking more at companies that are generally exporting as well with a different dynamic than in Egypt. So there are issues, there are different countries going up and down. There are different ways to play the respective countries. Some of them you want to be in equity. Maybe you don't want to be in equity in Egypt today, but maybe you want to be in private credit, exporting on an export basis. That's a great business for us. We're about to deploy into a company right now. But we're also deploying into a company right now in the Western Province. I'm not allowed to say the name, but it's a domestic champion. Does consumer products for babies. Fantastic CapEx. We're putting money in to build new factories to satisfy domestic demand. So there are opportunities in all the different countries. There are different tools to play those respective countries. You need different skill sets for those respective countries. But we've been able to do it since 2007 through a number of private funds and have had and enjoyed a lot of success.
Thank you. Mr. Blair, given this aspect, the diverse risk profile of the region, what kind of premiums do you require from risk premiums do you require from your returns in the region?
Sure. Maybe I'll, in answering that, let me step back a little bit. We're an investor in 42 countries, and so in our experience, capital tends to go where it's welcome and where they see opportunity. And so those are really the two criteria when you boil it down. And so welcoming is regulatory framework, talent, all the things that have been talked about earlier today. And so then it comes down to opportunity. And so we're a single sector investor. We invest in energy, both new energy and traditional energy, but we have a much more narrow mandate than some of my colleagues here. And so for us, there were two flagship transactions in 2021 that really kind of was the starting bell for the industry, and those were both the Aramco transactions. So Muhtar mentioned the gas pipeline. We were fortunate to do the oil pipeline transaction, and
it was one of the biggest deals in the region.
It was big. For anything you do with Aramco is big, so I think by definition, and so. And it was really a great opportunity for us. Obviously, we were very proud and happy to partner with Aramco, but it was an opportunity for us to then take that investment and show it to the rest of our investors around the world. So if you think about private equity firms, we're just conduits for other people's capital. And so we travel around the world and we meet with institutional capital all over the world, and then we show them opportunities, and through our portfolio investments, they get exposure to the rest of the world. And so for us as a firm, this was our chance to educate our clients about the opportunity set here in our asset class with the preeminent company in our industry. And it was a very large investment, as you said. We underwrote the entire thing. We believed that it would be well received by our clients, but we didn't know. And at the end of the day, it was. And so through that, we now have a whole group of our investors who are saying, all right, well, what's next? And so that's what's motivated us to really redouble our efforts and build a proper business here and increase the investment activity in our space.
So what's a fair return for you on private equity deals?
Let's
say for
enough.
The GCC region.
The cost of capital is going up around the world right now. I think that's a good thing. We've lived through 15 years of monetary policy that has distorted risk and return, and a lot of things that shouldn't have gotten capital got capital. And so that air coming out of the balloon in the long run is a healthy thing. And so for people like us and for Brookfield who invest in real assets, a return to normal is something that we're looking forward to. And so, people want return expectations in private equity are certainly, on a high teens basis and above. And then I would add on top of that, in our space, if we're investing in new energy, it's probably lower than that. And if we're investing in traditional energy, it's higher. So the risk premium associated with investing in traditional energy is at an all-time high, because for big parts of the world, they've said, we don't want it. And so for those people who are constructive on it, they want to get paid.
And given what you have mentioned, the tightening cycle that we are seeing from central banks around the world, do you think that the golden age of private equity is over?
No, because that's a version of private equity where there's no true alpha generation and everything is beta and leverage. And yes, there are a lot of firms who made a lot of money with that, making that trade. For firms that have been around a long time, we just were fortunate to celebrate our 41st anniversary. And so as a firm, and so we've invested across a lot of cycles, and you know, over time you figure out what real alpha is and what's not. I mean, a lot of people sell alpha as just, you know, it's really just expensive beta.
Thank you. Jad, I want to hear your thoughts. I've mentioned in the introduction, and we have heard about these big deals in the region. When was the shift, in your opinion? The region was usually a source of funding. Now it's an investment destination. Why do you think? What factors contributed to that?
So, look, first of all, thanks for having us, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to the PIF for organizing this. We noticed the shift probably about 6 to 7 years ago.
So with vision.
With the vision, of course. Now, having said that, personally, I've been part of teams that have been investing in the GCC and Saudi Arabia since 2010. So we've always been bullish on the region for a number of reasons. I think number one, and when I say the region, I mean for us as Brookfield, we really focus on the GCC. And there are a couple reasons for that. I think number one, you know, you mentioned political stability. There's very good political stability in these countries. There's a respect for capital, which is very important to us, because having the right laws and regulations is one part of it, but a respect for capital goes over and above that. That's something that is an ethical practice, and we feel very comfortable in the GCC for those reasons. I think Mitab had mentioned about you know, there being a young demographic, and so we started investing institutionally in the region 2018. We started investing from our balance sheet, Brookfield capital, in the region in 2015. Until today, Brookfield's own capital is a big part of everything we're doing here, of course, through our global funds. But what's been interesting is it's gotten a lot bigger than we ever anticipated it to get. Today, Brookfield in the region, we're just under $10 billion of AUM. And that's spread across a multitude of different sectors. That's real estate, that's infrastructure, that's private equity. So it's not that we took a view on one specific sector and we said, this is it. We have the track record and the history in the region to be able to evaluate many different types of transactions. Most importantly, we have the trust of our investment committee, which is a global investment committee, to execute those transactions on the ground.
Thank you so much. Mr. Yasser, going back to you, do you think that other factors played a role also in attracting the foreign investors, and probably maybe the legal reforms? We have bankruptcy laws that were introduced rather recently in both UAE and Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so absolutely. The legal reforms, bankruptcy, I used to work for a firm called Alvarez and Marcel. We worked on restructuring. Now there's the regulations in place so that investors know that if things go wrong, there's a recourse, there's a process to deal with that. And every smart investor, we used to brag that we hadn't lost money, but every smart investor would come to us and say, well, if you haven't lost money, then you haven't learned anything yet. And they focus on when things go wrong, how do you sort it? What's the legal framework in Saudi? What's the legal framework in the UAE? That's one of the other factors we have to talk about when we think about some of the other countries in which we invest. What's the legal framework in Egypt and Turkey and other jurisdictions? I think a lot of also helped us get some of that capital was frankly, and I have to say it very frankly, Mutab and his team came in at the end of COVID, and they became our anchor investor in our third private credit fund. Now, we had a good track record, we had a good story, but the virtual cycle of getting PIF in as an anchor investor, then reassuring American family offices, which is a sort of a funny situation, to come in, and then that getting additional institutional investors from the region. So I think you have to have a regulatory framework, but you also have to have a domestic asset management ecosystem or a number of managers in which investors, whether they're institutional investors abroad, family offices abroad, feel comfortable investing in.
Thank you so much. Going back to you, Jad, and I want to talk about the fundraising process in the Middle East region. We have heard previously the importance of the local relationship, the local expertise. So how do you balance this with your requirements for global governance, global transparency standards in the way you do business in the Middle East region?
So look, I would say Brookfield operates pretty consistently across all the globe. And so we have offices in over 30 countries, and what you're going to find in each one of our offices is the same level of consistency and governance that you would find across the board. One thing that we have done differently in this part of the world, as an investment practice, we have focused on partnerships, and partnerships with leading regional firms. Now, when I say regional, it doesn't just mean that they're here, but they are companies from the region. They could be global companies, they could be regional, they could be single country. And the reason for that is we know that we can bring a lot of operational expertise and sector expertise from everything we're doing globally, but it would be somewhat naive for a global player to just think they can walk into the GCC or Saudi and start operating from day one as if they knew it for 30, 40 years. And we found that that's been exceptionally helpful to us, having partners who are with us and are also, let's say, just as vested as we are for a good outcome. Now, as I said previously, a lot of our investment, actually at this stage, all of our investment in the Middle East has been from our global funds. It has not been from regional funds. Every dollar that has come into the region has been global capital. Now, what's happened is we've grown, quite frankly, much bigger than we thought we would, and our partners are now saying, we want to do more with you. We can't deploy all of our global capital here. We have to be well diversified. And so naturally that brings up the question of should we start exploring more regional strategies? And I think with the track record that we've demonstrated, hopefully that will be the case in the future.
I would like to hear your thoughts on this issue. But how is your approach for doing business in the Middle East compared to the rest of to other markets?
Sure. Our experience is probably different than my colleagues in that historically we've raised very little capital from the Middle East. And that's because, again, of the sector that we're invested in, a lot of capital in the region was looking to diversify away from energy. And so they weren't looking to then invest in foreign energy managers. And so, to be honest with you, we're significantly underweight relative to other parts of the world here. Now, what started to change all that is energy transition, new energy, renewables, hydrogen, carbon sequestration, and all of the associated infrastructure. And so it's been that broadening of the asset class, which I think has made us more relevant in the region than we historically have been.
Thank you. Mr. Mutab, we are here to discuss also the role that the PIF is playing in the asset management industry. I want to hear from you, how is the PIF supporting the private equity industry? How is it supporting the GPs, the LPs in the region and attracting more funds to the region, private equity funds? That's
a very good question. I think there's a lot of effort that the PIF is doing, and I think the results are shown. We have investors and funds coming to the region and putting money here. One of the main things that we do, especially when we believe in the fund vision and if we believe on the strategy that the fund is undertaken, we go and anchor that fund. And once the PIF name is on that fund, GPs have an easier task to go and market it around the region. A lot of the sovereign funds in the region would love to come and invest in Saudi, but they need some sort of an unbiased investor who can come and put money in projects. And that's the role of our dear friends here who are having a great pedigree and a nice reputation investing around the world. They take all that money and they do the right projects. One of the things that we always do is also warehousing some of the investments. I gave an example of the BlackRock investment that we did in 2021. Now we're happy to take that investment and put it in the fund so investors can have right away returns from their commitments. So many people have said it. Private equity is a very human business that is built on relationships. A lot of the leads, which is the biggest challenge in the private equity side, is made, and the source of leads are relationships and knowing people. So we work very hard with asset managers to bring them here, to set offices with them, and sometimes we second them, some of our own employees, to go and work with them to kick-start the operations in a quicker manner. And alhamdulillah, touch wood, we've been succeeding in that strategy. But I think the most important thing, and maybe I should close with that, PIF is different. We have sector-specific knowledge in almost all of the main sectors. A lot of these funds, when they come and they work with the PIF, they like to get access to that specific sector knowledge. And by working together as one team, we definitely create better opportunities and chances for success. PIF always believed in partnerships. We always say that we would like to be the partner of choice. And definitely in the asset management realm, we would love to be the partner of choice for all of the asset managers and funds around the world.
Thank you so much. Jad, one issue we haven't discussed yet is co-investments. I know it's a popular method that private equity is using in fundraising. Do you think it is equally important in the Middle East region?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you look at where are the interesting transactions going in the region, they're getting bigger, they're getting more sophisticated. It's no longer possible to target a certain smaller size of companies. And our view is Brookfield brings with it, obviously, the experience of dealing with complexities in the region, but the scale. So if you're looking at a $2 billion equity ticket, there are very few people who are able to do that, and also able to underwrite that in the Middle East. Now, there are also, to that point, very few funds that can warehouse that investment within that, because to fit $2 billion of equity, you probably need to have about $15 to $20 billion of a fund to deploy that. And so it's our expectation that co-investments will, it's not that they would be nice to do, they will become essential to the development of the market, because you will need a consortia of investors in order to get a deal done, just because of the limitations that already exist in the market. We are in the process of getting regulatory approval for a $2.7 billion take private of a Middle Eastern company, and we put together a consortium of 4 or 5 investors, including Saudi investors. And so the reason, actually on that one, we could have put it in a fund, but going back to the partnership we were saying before, we thought it was smarter to bring in co-investors who we can go hand in hand with to the finish line.
Thank you so much. Mr. Blair, let's end these discussions with you. I want to hear your outlook on the private equity landscape in the MENA region. A lot of activity that we have seen was focused on private equity, VC, infrastructure funding. Where do you see this heading moving forward?
I think, as I said, referenced earlier, I think full cycle private equity is a critical part of the financial ecosystem, and people who think about it in the context of public markets and trades and things like that, that really misses the picture. We've got a much longer investment horizon, a much different investment thesis, and we just view things differently than people who are buying and selling marketable securities. For us, the maturation of our business here and the market here is we want to see many of our competitors here. And I've had this conversation with PIF. Having 1 or 2 people here is not a market. A market is, and yes, would you like to have no competition? Sure. But that's not sustainable. And the international investors who are investing with each of us, they're going to say, well, why are you different? What do are you taking risks that your colleagues are not? And so we want to see more competitors here. We want to see increased transaction velocity. We want to see, build out more local talent, be able to execute more transactions here, and see the full ecosystem develop. I think in the long run, it's the rising tide lifts all boats.
And do you think that having new players in the landscape, especially from sovereign wealth funds, do you think this is affecting valuations of companies in the region? Like same pool, bigger players?
Yeah, I think valuations will work itself out. Again, you know, there's always someone who will provide a lower cost of capital, but they're not often the people who win. It's, you know, it's what else do you bring to the table? What's the secret sauce? What's your skill? What is that alpha? And that's how you try to compete. If you live life trying to be the lowest cost of capital, that's not a very happy existence.
Thank you. Yasser, I want to hear your concluding remarks
Oh, okay, thank you.
on your outlook of the private equity in the region.
Yeah, so I think, you know, where I have to give credit to PIF, I think they've built out an ecosystem at every level. So you have the big guys who do, you know, big infrastructure. You have the emerging managers with the JADA fund of funds. And then you have people like us who are sort of this mid-market private equity, private credit alternative asset manager in that $300 to $400 million range. And as you fill out, and hopefully we grow up into guys like you, but the opportunities within the region are clear. Firms that have been here for a while, firms that have been investing for a while, that have a track record since 2007, 2009, and have a series of successes that aren't just great for the region, but that compare themselves to returns globally, that's how you build out regional champions. But PIF and others within the region have to play a role in supporting us, and we expect them to.
Thank you so much, all, for this lively discussion. Thank you for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the program. Osama, I leave it to you.